All right, welcome to our panel, Real Talk with Recruiting Leaders. Huzzah, we're doing this. Um, I've been really excited to have conversations with recruiters like this for a while. I actually kind of have a love-hate relationship with recruiters. Maybe many of you do as well. Mine is especially complicated because I used to be one. And for those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm the founder of interviewing.io, was an engineer, then a recruiter, was a recruiter for about 3 years. In my experience, a lot of recruiters are horrible. And then when you're very lucky, you meet some great ones. And three of, I think, the world-class, absolute best recruiters in the business are here with us today to answer our burning questions. And I'm so excited to have them with us. So, guys, I took your bios and made a slide. I thought, maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself. Also, I bolded everywhere you worked because I know that's what people care about. Let's not pretend otherwise. One other cool thing. I added up how many years all of you have been in the business, and it's actually 35 years. That's a very long time. So, Zach, why don't you say a few words?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think what is here on the slide encapsulates my background pretty succinctly. But yeah, I lead talent at a VC firm called Dragonfly right now. We are in the crypto space. There are about 120, 130 companies in our portfolio. And my role has a few parts, but I'm overseeing the internal growth as Dragonfly has grown. And I'm also working very closely with a lot of the early stage teams and founders of the portfolio companies to ensure that they're doing hiring well and effectively. So all sorts of stuff from planning headcount through where to find people, how to negotiate, how to build a good interview process, really anything related to recruiting and people. Before this, I was at a company called 0x. I joined there as their 10th employee and first recruiter and kind of ran all of their recruiting and people stuff for about 3 years. I did something similar at a company called Heap that came out of Y Combinator before that. I joined right after their Series A and probably about 15th employee and kind of ran all their end recruiting stuff for a good long while. Before that, I was fortunate to work with these other two gentlemen at Dropbox, which is where we all kind of got to know each other a little bit. And then I was at Google, I want to say almost 10 years ago now. And Chris and I worked together over there too. So it's been fun ride, kind of moving orders of magnitude smaller companies throughout my career pretty intentionally. Learned a lot along the way. So it's been fun.
Thank you. Jeff, I couldn't find a picture of you on the internet, so you get to be the cool interviewing.io Batman.
Awesome. So I'm Jeff, also Batman. So currently I'm consulting with a few startups to help them set up kind of their recruiting process, as well as helping them source and recruit candidates as well. So kind of the full spectrum of things. Previously, the last 2-3 years, probably been doing the same, working across, startups in tech, as well as EV, clean renewable energy, as well as some other stealth companies as well that are currently undisclosed, as well as, some other experience that I have as well is advising a few startups, mostly in the recruiting tool space.
Including
so one is
interviewing.io.
And on top of that, a few other up and coming recruiting tools startups as well. So right now, I would say most of my bread and butter is probably working with applicant tracking systems, but working really closely with recruiters such as Zach and Chris to understand, how to kind of customize and build tools out to follow closely along with the recruiting process. So, you as candidates, when you apply to these companies, it's not kind of scattered all over the place, or, good recruiters won't end up, ghosting you.
Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all of that.
Yeah. And kind of really quickly, just to kind of sum up the summary, I've kind of worked at all of the big tech companies. Again, to Zach's point, at Dropbox is kind of where Chris, myself is, well as Zach kind of met. And, I think from there, we've kind of, kept in touch, just because, to Aline's point earlier, coming across really good recruiters is really hard. So you should definitely keep close to the ones that, are good in the industry.
Hell yeah.
It was a special time at Dropbox, I think.
Chris, you're up.
Yeah. Excuse me. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Ossing. I currently lead engineering, product, and design recruiting at Plaid. Joined about 100 people. Been there for about 4.5, 5 years. Before that, I worked at a consultancy company called Blueprint Talent Group based in Chicago, where I worked on kind of a wide range of clients, mainly spent time in VC, high frequency trading firms and hedge funds, also some 10 to 20 person startups, I think, during my time there. Like the ongoing thread here is that before that I was at Dropbox and then VMware and Google, where primarily I spent most of my time in engineering recruiting. So
Awesome.
that's
Thank
me.
you. All right. So I think I'll leave this slide up for now, and we'll get into the questions. So I'm going to try to do about half and half panel discussion and half your questions. So think about what you want to ask these fine gentlemen. I'm just gonna get right into it, guys. So first question, and jump in if you feel compelled to answer. How much does the recruiter call actually matter, right? When you apply to a company, generally it's the first step in the process. Does it actually get factored into hiring decisions? And if a candidate actually does get rejected after a recruiter call, what are some of the most common reasons why?
Who's going to start?
We're gonna
I can,
have to just jump in. I hate the
yeah,
awkward pauses after the question. You guys, I want you to talk over each other. Just jump out of your seat.
Yeah, I can kick it off. I do think it matters. I think to some degree, it depends on the stage of the company and even kind of the experience level or the role related knowledge that the recruiter might have in terms of whether they want to screen someone out. Like, do they really need to defer to somebody else for stronger signal, or how much does the team really trust their judgment? I think it can factor in at the time of the recruiter call, and it can also even factor in at the time of a hiring decision. Like a lot of the stuff that gets discussed in these initial calls may come back up as they're kind of circling back on the whole process. And I guess to the point of like, how experienced is the recruiter? How much sway do they have? It's also like, how much of a voice do they have in those discussions? There were situations at startups where I used to run those discussions, like kind of rally the whole team and drive the conversation around whether we wanted to hire someone. There were other situations at bigger companies where I may have just sat in the room and I don't think my opinion mattered quite as much, or my voice certainly wasn't the driver for that conversation, at least. But in general, I think the goal for those calls is often primarily a sell, honestly, from a recruiter. And sometimes it's logistical too. Like from a recruiter's perspective, especially if they sourced you, if they went out and reached out to you, I think they're often trying to get you excited and learn more about the things that are important to you in an ideal role so that they can highlight those things throughout the rest of the process. And even figure out some logistics to hopefully plan interviews smoothly and kind of the right way, and just generally establish rapport. I think if you applied directly and if the recruiter is unsure about you or your resume or your strength as a candidate, it might be a little bit less of a sell and kind of a little bit more of an investigation, feeling things out. But selling and relationship building, establishing rapport is still always going to be kind of a primary goal of those calls. I think that's what's often on a recruiter's mind when they're having that conversation. Certainly want to learn about you too, for sure. But I think the most common things that people get screened out for on those calls are major cultural red flags. If there's something that is, it's just something super weird happened on the call, there's a chance that you might not move forward. Major communication issues, if it's just very clear that like, you're not going to be able to communicate clearly to the team throughout the process or whatever. I mean, I've seen candidates kind of get weeded out at that stage for that reason too. I think sometimes it can become clear that, somebody might be a little bit too junior for the position. And I've seen recruiters, let folks go on a call like that too, just based on the depth with which someone speaks to their experience or what the role might require. But it's actually pretty rare that I've screened somebody out on a recruiter call. I think I really try to have a pretty high degree of confidence in the resume review stage alone before I spend my time or a candidate's time. And So the short answer is like, yes, I do think it can matter both in a hiring decision and in terms of just proceeding to the rest of the interviews. But I would also keep in mind that main goal for the recruiter, I think, is often getting you excited, learning about what's important to you, figuring out logistics, and kind of establishing rapport broadly, I would say.
Well, Chris or Jeff, anything to add, or shall we move on to my questions are like in increasing order of controversy.
We like controversy. That's what Chris and Zach and I always did at Dropbox. No, it's kidding. But kind of to echo to what Zach said, I think a lot of times it also depends on the size of the company. Sometimes you might start with talking to a sourcer first, who is specialized in terms of doing these screenings. And I think initial calls typically aren't necessarily just the selling point, but it's also to really understand the types of projects that you have done, right? So a lot of times people will just kind of dump a lot of their experience onto their resume or keep it at a high level. But when it comes to really understanding if people actually have the experience in terms of hands-on and building things, or if they were just part of a project, I think that's a lot of times what we suss out in the call as well. And then, to Zach's point, when it comes to sourcing, if it is more of a passive piece, then that is something where we will also kind of get you to try and get you excited about the company, as well as discussing what we can discuss when it comes to projects and things that you would be working on when it comes to a team, right? I think a lot of people, especially in engineering, they're like, oh, it's just engineering, it's going to be the same projects, or why would I jump ship when I'm doing the same thing over here? A lot of times, there is an interesting aspect to the role that we're potentially looking for. And if it is like a smaller company, then I think that impact piece is one of the things that, we can really get people engaged on, especially if it's a two-person, engineering team and an early startup like, Dropbox when we were there, which was what, like 500 people maybe?
All right.
Yeah. Look, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna say this is going to be the theme of all these questions. Is going to be you're going to see big company answers, and you're going to get smaller company answers. And I think this is where all of us have kind of gravitated toward smaller companies, because I think our answers and our ownership and our say has a lot more weight to it. Obviously, it depends on the hiring manager and your relationship with the business and how you make decisions. But like I can tell you, I got kicked out of my first hiring committee at Google because I said
Really?
something. Yeah, you can go. It was my first offer. It was my first time ever being in recruiting, and I sat there and they were talking about something, and I perked up and I just said something, and they're like, "Yeah, you got to go." So I got walked out. So
Do you
Google, maybe
remember
not
what
so
it
much.
was? And
FAANG, maybe not.
can you share a little more detail?
A gap in resume. It was like, hey, this has person had a gap, and it was just kind of one of these things where, yeah, I was like, oh, I know that. Here's why, and they're like, you need to leave, and I got promptly escorted out of the room. But that's so. I think everyone, the takeaway here for us is that, look, it does matter, right? Like, please be kind to recruiters. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. If you do treat them poorly, like, they can reject you. And the evaluative process is going to really depend on company stage, and more importantly, the hiring manager and what they're looking for, because that's really what we are. We are the bouncer, so to speak, for them as well sometimes. So
All right, I'm gonna skip ahead and get a little more juicy. So one of the things, and I don't know the answer to this, and I used to run all of our salary negotiation stuff at interviewing.io. Now I don't anymore, and I still don't know the answer to this. So I really want to know how are recruiters compensated? But in particular, this is the thing I really want to know. Do recruiters get any kind of bonus for negotiating candidates down and getting them to accept a lower comp package?
I've never been in an environment where, and this is, I want to say this very clearly. Like, I know these places exist. I know because I've heard people, even friends of mine, say these things. I've never been in an environment where this has been the case. It's never been variable comp. I don't think so. I would have been in a place where there's been kind of a variable comp. That's not, I think that's from a philosophical standpoint, not that's going to be. And so most of the organizations have been, compensation looks pretty standard. Like, it's whatever standard within the company. But that being said, I do know it's out there. I know agencies are compensated a little differently. But that's it. I don't know. I haven't heard anything. Jeff or Zach, I'm not sure if there's like a example here.
Yeah, I mean, this might exist, but no, I don't think it's super common. And I think often in-house recruiters are compensated like most other folks at companies. Like they might be paid a salary and receive some equity or something like that. I haven't personally seen companies specifically pay recruiters more for negotiating candidates down. I think recruiters are often gold on something like the number of offers that they put out or the number of offers that get accepted, but that's not even always the case. They're not necessarily gold on like how much salary they're giving away or something like that. I think while there are probably recruiters that want and need to make sure that they're paying fairly within the company's compensation structure, and they might really truly care about budget constraints, like especially at early startups, they generally like to be the strongest offers out if they can. You know, like it makes the recruiter's life easier in terms of getting offers accepted if they can get you a strong offer. The only way that I think they're incentivized to get your pay to be lower for some reason, and this is debatable, is it might be easier to get buy-in internally on certain things from people if you know people know that the salary is going to be a little bit lower or something. But I think a good recruiter knows how to make a case and is generally trying to act in the best interest of the candidate and the company. Like they're trying to strike the right balance where everybody kind of feels like they win. And even in the agency environment, to Chris's point, I think commission-based pay is more common at agencies. Like I don't super often see commission-based pay for in-house recruiters, but even in that case, they're usually working on a contingency basis, meaning they're taking some percentage of the first year's salary of whoever gets hired. So they're actually incentivized to get you more money from a monetary perspective, because the higher you get paid, the more commission they're going to make, essentially. You might be dealing with somebody on retainer as an agency recruiter, but that's much more rare than contingency. And even in that case, I don't think they're typically incentivized to negotiate you down either. So I think it'd be pretty uncommon for a recruiter to want to try and get somebody a lower salary, other than being aware of like budgetary constraints of the company.
Yeah,
Are
I
the
haven't seen
times
it
when
often either.
go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I haven't seen that often either or anywhere, but I have heard of people being compensated based off of what they can close a candidate at. And then I think to kind of what Zach mentioned, you know, a lot of times there are larger organizations that will kind of keep track of budgets. So, you know, they will have the numbers at what recruiters close candidates at and kind of keep track of that. But I don't think it directly impacts, you know, whether a recruiter ends up getting a bonus or anything, because typically it does tie back to more like at the end of the like quarter or half, whatever their performance is measured on, is basically what, they will, get incentivized on is, salary increases or stock refreshers. But typically they're basically leveled in terms of just the same as, different organizations within, different teams within an organization.
So when a recruiter pushes back on a demand that a candidate might make, a lot of the time it's because they don't want to have to get approvals, right? And they just want to move the process forward as quickly as possible.
I think it's twofold, right? I think part of it is the reapproval process, but also, a lot of times recruiters do have, compensation bands. And depending on kind of, how well candidates perform in their interviews, that could either, keep them at that current level or up level the position that they were potentially looking for in the past. So anytime they do go, out of band potentially, if let's say a candidate requests like just a ridiculous amount of money, like 40, 50K more than kind of what they're currently making or what that position is offering, then I think a lot of times, there's a lot of kind of back and forth that, recruiters have to do, not just with, hiring managers, but also, the comp team as well from finance to kind of get those approvals if it is an extraordinary circumstance.
That makes sense. So let me ask you guys this, switching parts of the funnel for a moment. Let's say that I'm a great engineer, but I don't look good on paper. Am I just fucked? Like, let's say I don't have a network. I don't know anybody. I want to get into the kinds of companies where you've all worked. What do I do?
Yeah.
You're fucked.
I think there are, well, I wouldn't say you're fucked, but I think there are things you can do. I think in that case, open source work, and even if you do have a great resume, I mean, like I feel like any open source work, and I'm not even just talking about engineering, but things that you can put out publicly that kind of show that you know your shit, or you're truly knowledgeable about the space or the niche that the company is in that you're applying for. You're genuinely passionate about it. These kinds of things can go a really long way. I think even proof of networking with other strong people, believe it or not, and I might have like a little bit of a weird bias in that I work in the crypto space. The crypto space very heavily congregates on Twitter for some reason. And if I were to go on somebody's Twitter account and I see that they're followed by 100 people who I really respect, or they got retweeted by a few people who I really respect, or even if they follow a bunch of people who I respect, and it kind of signals to me that they're deep in the space and they're truly passionate about it because they're following some like niche influencers or something. Like, these things can all be kind of additional signal that I think might push a recruiter over the edge and give somebody a shot. So anything that you can do publicly off your resume, be it open source work on GitHub, engineering, writing, blogging, getting good engagement on tweet threads of your own, associating yourself with kind of like strong, well-known organizations and people and teams, that stuff can all be super helpful. I think another really cool trick, I mean, I've hired people, like if there's a specific company you want to work for and they have some open source work of their own, like go start making some commits to their repos, or like solve some of their open issues or something like that. It can be a really good way to get people's attention at the company. Two other quick thoughts. I guess you can try writing like a thoughtful kind of succinct note to the hiring manager or to a recruiter. Like, go find them on LinkedIn and make it clear that you understand their value and why they're interesting, and your value and how those things align. You might have some success if you can write a compelling enough message. And I think another thing you could potentially try is like you could offer to do a contract or an internship potentially. It's often less risk and investment to a company, and it's kind of a way to prove yourself before they decide they want to make you a full-time offer. They might be willing to take you on in that capacity, if that makes sense. So those are some of the immediate thoughts that come to mind for me.
So building a personal brand is
Yeah,
key.
personal brand is huge for sure.
Yeah,
Okay, and you, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, shameless plug, partnering with, various tools like interviewing.io, when it comes to these companies, like a lot of times they will have kind of that connection with recruiters, whether it's an organization that's testing out the product or, someone that actually is actively on the platform. A lot of times they can also, give you that additional signal that we might not necessarily have if, let's say, you don't have, a blog, if you're fresh out of university and, you're just trying to get started with your career. Typically finding something that has some sort of partnership with these companies, typically is another good aspect and good way kind of to get connected with the larger companies, even the hotter startups. Chris, sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, Elena, like, are you asking, when you're saying like, how do people with, not as shiny resumes get into companies? We've all worked at big companies. We've all worked at FAANG. We worked at smaller companies. So I'm kind of curious, like, is there a particular company that you're thinking about? Size? Are you thinking about?
I think most of our users are probably, just based on what we've seen in our data, and folks would love to hear in the chat if this is not the case. Most of our users are interested in FAANG and also kind of FAANG adjacent companies, right? So the Dropboxes, the Lyfts,
Yeah.
and whoever's not frozen right now, which we can also talk about. But companies like that, where they're getting a ton of inbound, and you're competing with a lot of people that have strong resumes, and competing with bias as well.
Look, I would say this, right?
Plaid is a great example. Like, many of our users are interested in Plaid too.
I would kind of categorize it into three groups, right? And the first one with FAANG, interviewing matters. I think at the end of the day, you have to show up, and I think once you get your foot in the door, I think it's so take those interviews seriously, because I think once you get to further along in the process, like Google recycles like interviewing, like they recycle, meaning they is really important.
Chris, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's just me.
Yeah, he was. I was wondering if it was
freezing out.
for Chris.
There are all these gems.
All right.
Chris, last thing I
Yeah.
heard is that Google recycles a lot of stuff.
Yeah, Google recycles candidates. They will revisit candidates quite a bit. Now, that being said, this might be different from what the current market is stating, but I would say just to speed this along, like if it's FAANG, interviews matter. Your scores matter. That's how you get through the foot in your door. I think if you're looking at the mid-sized companies like the Plaids, the Dropboxes at the time, I think like personal brands mean a lot. I think if you're going to the smaller companies, some of the like open source, um, those kinds of things really, I've seen Plaid hire like in the early days, people that were, pull requesting a lot of the stuff on our API on GitHub. So, those things matter. So I would almost segment like a kind of a three-pronged strategy, right? For people here, it's like, if you want to work at the bigger companies, interviews matter, right? Take those seriously. That still doesn't get you the foot in the door, but it's something that gets you there. Middle of the companies, I think I totally agree with Zach and Jeff. And the smaller ones, yeah, I think you can be a bit more personable, right? Like it's
Reach out to a
easier.
founder, right?
It's so much easier. Our co-founder William, who's no longer with Plaid, other reasons great. He sends me people that he forwards all the time. Like people reach out to him all the time, and because I've had a connection with him over the years, he still sends me people. It's like, hey, can you reach out to this person, or find the right person to talk to? So all the things above, I just want a plus one. But you can't. I mean, finding a hiring manager at Google is going to be difficult. So
I think that three-pronged strategy makes a lot of sense. One thing I tell people too is like, just find like engineers at these companies and just ping them. And like, especially if that engineer had something on Hacker News or they wrote a blog, write to them, be like, hey, I liked your blog, and then make it really earnest. Like, don't bullshit them, like say something real, and then be like, hey, how do I give me some advice? And that can also work. So speaking of like non-traditional candidates and resumes and how much it matters to have FAANG on your resume, I wanted to play a little game with you guys. I want us to do like a real live resume review. So I have a few resumes that are anonymized. I've gotten everybody's permission, not doing anything untoward here. And none of them are like stellar, right? At least on paper. These candidates are great, but their resumes, for whatever reasons, they're not like immediately, oh my God, like every recruiter would want to talk to this person. And I think that that's what's interesting. Before we do that, I saw this thing on Reddit recently. It was about a year ago, actually. I don't know if people in the audience have seen this too, but this person posted this whole thread about how they made up a fake resume to test whether they would get responses. And they put all sorts of fancy brands all over it. And they wanted to see if recruiters would click into the links because the links all rickroll you. But they got a 90% response rate. And they're like, okay, let's take this a step further and start putting ridiculous things like, oh wait, I'm not sharing my screen there. Like ridiculous things like fraternity record for most vodka shots in one night. So this is the actual resume that this person used. And at first glance, it looks great. And then you kind of scroll around and you're like, wait, spread herpes to 60% of the intern team. But they sent this out and like apparently they got a 90% response rate, which maybe speaks to the earlier point about how there are a lot of shitty recruiters out there. So I want to see how good recruiters look at resumes because I want to believe that it's not all about whether you have a FAANG on there. And with that in mind, you guys haven't seen these before, so this is going to be real. I have. Let's start with this one. So can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Right. So just take a little bit of time to peruse that, and then I would just love initial reactions about what's good here and what's not as good.
Is there a specific role that you're thinking this would be?
Oh, so let's assume this is for an experience appropriate, like generalist backend role. In this person's case, maybe they're looking for an eng manager position. So nowhere does it say this person gave the intern team herpes, which is already, I think, a big plus.
Yeah, I would leave that off your resume for sure.
Yeah. So would you talk to this person? Why or why not?
I would talk to this person. I would say career trajectory is pretty strong. You could kind of see senior software engineer, and then they eventually became a lead, and then an eng manager. And then in terms of kind of some of the bullet points in each of their, experiences, I think, creating what the dynamic GUI generation was pretty cool. And then I would say from the lead software engineering side, having kind of those quantitative metrics like 9+ billion times is like pretty good. Maybe some grammatical errors there, but I think quantitative numbers are usually pretty good as well. Increasing mobile ad revenue by 300%, I think is pretty strong. And then also rebuilding, something that's pretty crucial, like a whole gift store from ground up, I think is pretty solid as well. Whether this person actually built it themselves or led the team, that's something we would want to suss out in, let's say, a recruiter screen, where what their contribution to actually redoing a hefty project like that would look like.
So one of the things I'm hearing here is like career progression matters, and that's one of the things that I think people look for. It's like, are you in the same role from company to company, or is each change a step up?
Yeah, exactly. And then I would say don't try to inflate your resume in terms of like saying, hey, I'm senior when, you only have 1 year of experience, So I think, being honest on your resume is a lot of times can, benefit you in the long run.
Does anybody think they wouldn't talk to this person? And if so, why not?
I'm waiting for you, Chris. Go ahead.
Probably not for the role that they want to be in. Right. And it's simply about 1 year of management, right? Before then, 5 years of, actually, I don't know how long they've been a technical lead. And then before that, it's like a senior engineer. So it really depends on the role, right? If I'm looking for an engineering manager role, I'm probably looking for somebody with at least 2 to 3 years of experience to get management principles down. I also don't know hi-fi networks, and I don't know what their management playbook looks like from an engineering standpoint. That matters. I think that's one of the unspoken rules about FAANG hiring, is that we're just utilizing those companies' playbooks in a lot of ways. So if you don't know a company, it's a disadvantage. You could always do some research, and the simple research I think I've always done is just look at alumni, right? That's always like a good recruiter will be like, I don't know hi-fi networks, like let me see who comes from there. That's always a great kind of understanding of the quality of the team and the work that they're doing.
Cool. So actually, I'm going to go off script for a second. Somebody posted in the chat saying, "Hey, can you guys review my resume?"
Right.
Are we down to do that? Like, I am Pavel.dev. If you are cool with us actually, telling you how it is, I think we can do it.
I'm down.
All right. We won't be able to do this for everybody, but Pavel gets the fortune favors the bold. So Pavel, you win. Oh, Pavel's your last name. Okay, there we go.
The one thing that keeps going through my mind as soon as I see these resumes is like, I don't understand the role enough. Like I have this like natural, very strong urge and inclination to like know the specifics of the role that I would be considering someone for. And I think my answer to this would change a good bit, but I understand we're just talking about kind of like generalist engineering position for the purposes of this exercise.
Yeah, I think in this case, it looks like most of his experience is being a full stack engineer, and then more recently he did back end. So maybe let's assume it's for one of those.
Yeah. Can you go? I'm sorry. So I think for me, like one of the things that I think I guess this is more like high level and zoomed out. I have a tendency to go bottom up. Like
Bottom up. Yep, let's do it.
I prefer bottom up, and although like I just want to make sure that everybody understands that that's not standard. I haven't heard a lot of recruiters that start from the bottom moving up in this way.
And kind of to what Chris is saying, a lot of recruiters have kind of their own different ways of reviewing resumes. And then, kind of highlighting, how we all have a little bit of a different perspective. A lot of times in larger organizations as well, recruiters and sourcers will be siloed into like specific roles. So, if let's say I came across this and, resume and it's not a fit for my role, it's like I might ping like Chris or Zach and go, hey, is this person a better fit for your role, right? So for example, if Chris was working on engineering manager roles, whereas, I'm only working on back end and then Zach's working on like a mobile specified role, then typically, really good recruiting orgs like the three of us when we were working together at Dropbox, we would constantly kind of share resumes and kind of, check with each other if we didn't know what companies did, if we've ever heard of these companies before and so forth.
Look,
a little off topic, but
yeah. Blaring thing, right? Like, and I wouldn't pick this person's resume up. I think if I was looking for a backend because of anything, I think there's.
You're cutting out again, Chris.
Sorry, I apologize, y'all. Internet. I'll be short. Here's a really good rule of thumb that I like to read through, and it's the so what. So like, let's scalable multi-tenant video.
Oh, Chris.
I can pick this up for Chris. I know what he's
Yeah.
talking about. But
Cool.
go ahead. If your internet keeps cutting out, I don't want to interrupt you.
Cut me. I
Go for it, Zach.
read every line there.
I think what Chris is trying to say is the so what rule is kind of what was the impact essentially? Like how can you quantify what it is that this stuff actually means to a business? So if you don't necessarily have a ton of super high immediate signal things on your resume, like organizations that a recruiter is going to be aware of, or a degree from a top tier school or something like that, a way that you can really kind of make yourself stand out is by asking yourself like, so what for every kind of line on your resume. Like cool, I'm trying to find a specific line that I can
Here's one. Develop time series data outlier detection and filtering. So what?
like what did that lead to, or why would a company really want to take that into consideration? I don't know, Chris, is that what you were kind of driving at? If you can hear me.
I can. I can hear everyone. I just can't seem to. My
Well,
audio
video
is
off
cutting
seems
out.
to help. Sad we
Cool.
won't be looking at your face, but glad we hear your voice.
Saving Jeff and everybody the problem. No, I'm just kidding. Zach said it very just straight to the point. The so what rule is like a rule of thumb when you're writing a resume, and something that I like to look for is, the so what rule. So that's, what was the quantifiable impact of your projects, and it helps. I might not understand it as a recruiter or not being as technical, but it does help me ground an idea of the scope of something that you've built for the business and whether or not you're being put in front of the most important things, right? Because that's a big indicator for resume for a good recruiter is like, are you given the most important work in your company at that time? The second thing is a lot of develop, right? I think it's a nitpicky thing, but developed versus led or architect is like another really powerful action item or action word. Now, don't inflate resumes, I would say in that sense, but I think if you like, oh yeah, like I actually design coinread.com, blah blah blah, like that's a far better thing to kind of pop out from a resume perspective. But
Also,
no,
what I'm
that's
hearing is that you have to be cognizant of, where you are on the like well pedigree to no pedigree continuum, right? And if you know that you don't have a big stamp on your forehead that says Google or MIT or whatever, right? Then the burden of proof is higher. So that means that you have to invest more time in answering so what and really like beating people over the head who read your resume with why the stuff you did mattered. Is that a good summary?
I think that's pretty accurate. Can I ask you to scroll up to the top again too,
Yeah.
Will?
Yeah.
Like all the way?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's all the way.
Can you click through to the GitHub?
Yeah. Okay. We're doing this, guys. Be great if this Rick rolls us.
That would be pretty excellent.
Is it not? Here's the GitHub. Okay. Great.
Can you scroll down to the, yeah, there you go,
Yeah, to the grid.
the grid. So I mean, I'll be honest with you too. I think not every recruiter is going to have a super solid grasp on like how to evaluate whether a GitHub is strong or not. But I think in some cases where they might be uncertain, if they pull up somebody's open source profile and they see that they're like making a ton of commits very regularly, that can be some indication. I also realize that the grid can be faked. If you scroll back up to the top too, I think if there are contributions to a lot of really highly starred projects or something like that, that can be another thing that a recruiter might, look at. And if they really want to, they might click through and try and see like how notable your contributions actually were. Like, are you just amending docs or are you actually making like, really meaningful contributions to big projects?
I would say like they would look at projects as well as the repositories and see, how active they are, as well as if anyone has kind of forked that code or project just to build on their own, because typically that's a good indicator too of someone that's kind of pretty strong in terms of what they're working on.
Cool. So I'd like to do a quick choose your own adventure. Just ask the attendants. We can do one of the following. Well, we can do one of the following three things. And Daniel, maybe you can tell us the best way people can quickly give us a temperature reading. One, we can do one more resume. I saw somebody submitted theirs. We can have these guys give us their feedback. So one is one more resume review. The second one is, I have one more question I was going to ask these guys, which is how have you ever personally pulled offers? So like you have a candidate has an offer and then you take it away. And then why did you do that? So that's option 2. And then option 3 is we jump right into the questions we have from the audience. We have about 17 minutes. Maybe we can, if you guys would be down to stay for 5 minutes more afterwards, we'll have a little bit more time. But those are the 3 options. Would love to get some kind of quick temperature reading. Daniel, how can we do that?
I'm down to stay a couple minutes later. The last thing I would say about this too is like just going, if you were to jump back to the resume really quick, I think I would be a little bit more inclined to talk to this person for like a DevOpsy focused kind of role than just like a pure backend position or something, just based on a lot of what I saw. So I don't know if that's worthwhile to mention, but.
Makes sense. All right, comments in the chat. I'm hearing questions. I'm hearing my question. What do folks want to do next? Okay, I'm gonna Q&A. All right, Q&A wins. We'll go to Q&A. All right, great. So, and Mr. Pavel, thank you for sharing your resume with us. That was very brave. And for the person that shared, for other folks that shared theirs, we'll grab the notes from the chat and we'll see if the interviewing.io team can give you a little bit of feedback. That would be a nice thing to do. All right, so the most upvoted question is, and this is a good one, why are some companies doing both layoffs and recruiting at the same time in this current climate?
That is a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Depend. Oh,
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it's just an assumption, but I'd imagine there has been a lot of cuts on parts of businesses that haven't been operating as effectively or as so I think you kind of release some of those. I mean, you release some people that from a department standpoint, that's one. Or you're shifting priorities and you need to hire for another skill set on the other. I think what's probably more common is that some of these companies that are laying off but still hiring, those cuts were probably lower performers. So they're more about performance managed out than anything. But that's I wouldn't be able to tell you if that's true or not, but that's just a guesstimate.
Yeah, I would say right now in the current situation of companies laying people off as well as, still continuing hiring, I think it's twofold, right? I think one is the uncertainty that's going around or happening around the world right now that is causing a lot of people to kind of worry about what the future in terms of revenue generation looks like. And obviously for these, companies that are building stuff for consumers, if people aren't buying and spending as much, then at the end of the day, that growth in terms of continuously building, iterating, and adding additional features or, products might not necessarily be there, right? And then I think with the situation in terms of like inflation as well, which, a lot of things are, getting really expensive, like from a cost perspective, that's not necessarily going to help the company when especially for the ones that are public and they're constantly under a microscope every 3 months, right, for their quarterly earnings. I think that's what's impacting a lot of these companies, right? So for example, if you look at the real estate companies, a lot of them are doing layoffs because the demand for mortgages and all that has dropped because the interest rates have gone up, right? So I think in that aspect, like, why do you need, let's say, like 1,000 engineers to work on your product at this point when everything is slowing down? So I think that's kind of, what's also leading to a lot of these companies really looking under a microscope in their own internally to see which products are going to help them continue to sustain, but also generate revenue, right? So I think at that point right now, like a lot of the teams that are potentially getting cut, you'll see is heavily going to be recruiting. And then, when it comes to more of the like technical side of things, I think the engineering aspect is, whether they're working on revenue generating products or, I think they're also like using that as an opportunity to, manage out the poor performers as well.
Let me ask a follow-up question. And Zach and Chris, I'd love to hear more from you as well. But one thing I've always wondered is, companies routinely lay off engineers because they're on a specific team, right? Snap, laid off most of their, if not all of their Web3 team fairly recently. And it's like, why wouldn't you take those engineers and put them on another team? Is it because it's more effort internally and you just don't have the corporate machinery to do that, and it's actually cheaper for you to just fire them and hire somebody else? Or is it just a way of managing out poor performers? And that's not what we're hearing in the press.
I think it also has to deal with, actually being able to find a home internally for these people, because a lot of times, these headcounts will be set in terms of what they can actually take on and what that additional resource would be, right? Like, let's say, I only need 2 people to work on this product, but a whole team of like 10 is potentially being impacted by these cuts. There's no way they're going to be able to fit like all 10 of those people, right? It's kind of like fitting, 6 people into a 5-person car. So I think at the end of the day, then that's when you have to kind of look at one performance and then also like how well, their background and like experience kind of actually, translates into, that potential role. But yeah, internal transfers, I think sometimes are an option, but given kind of the state of, which products are going, I just think like a lot of these teams don't have enough headcount to absorb a lot of these other engineers or other recruiters into existing internal recruiting or engineering teams.
Yeah, I think if in your example, Aline, like they cut the Web3 team or something like that, and there's a very highly specialized contingent of people on that team, like maybe these people are very good at, actually writing smart contracts, or I don't know a ton about the composition of Snap's Web3 team, for example, or maybe in another case, they were like computer vision researchers or something like that. I think a lot of this can tie back to shifting business priorities too. Like, are these the right people for what is now the high priority project internally, or does it make sense to bring on people who, might meet that need a little bit better? And coming back to the question before that, I think Jeff and Chris both framed this really nicely. But yeah, the big thing in my mind, like why are layoffs happening, but companies are still hiring? I think it probably is the 2 main points that got brought up, like reshifting priorities internally, different business needs, different projects that are being highlighted. Layoffs are almost always an opportunity for teams to let go of the lower performers, unfortunately. But the only other thing that kind of came to mind for me to add on to that is the psychological effect that might be left on what's left of the team after the layoffs. So like they may not know what attrition is going to look like from there, because if there's a massive layoff,
people are going to leave after that too.
Potentially. I mean, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable situation to be in, even if you survive the layoff. And there's often like a period of kind of settling down before things get back to normal. So there may be some aspect of like, if we hire new people, are they going to come into this with new eyes and have a little bit of a different attitude, or are there psychological implications here to doing this? And like, can we really predict how many people are going to leave beyond the people that we let go? Those are some of the other things that kind of cross my mind around why it might make sense to continue hiring a little bit, even though you're letting go of a lot of the team, if that makes sense.
Cool. I'm gonna keep going down the list. So next question. I'm going to read this verbatim. I'm not sure exactly what it's asking, but maybe you guys will grok it better than me. On the final stages, what are the drivers of a recruiter to negotiate compensation with candidates that have other offers? And Luis, if you want to give a little bit more color in the chat, please feel free. So what are the drivers for a recruiter to negotiate with compensation with candidates that have other offers?
I'm not sure I understand the question, to be honest with you.
I think maybe what he's asking is if a candidate has a bunch of other offers, then like how much leverage does the recruiter have to meet them where they are?
That's a very nuanced question. I feel like there are a lot of variables there. Yeah, I mean, I do think like BATNet is a thing, like it helps to come to the table with like, hey, here are the other things that I'm considering. That said, there are sometimes going to be constraints at companies, and recruiters and candidates might have to work together creatively to pull other levers and get to an offer that feels satisfying, even if it ends up being lower salary than what they might get elsewhere. I think a lot of this can depend on like the stage of the company that you're applying for too. Like an offer at a seed stage startup or a Series A company is going to look pretty different from an offer at like a FAANG company, and where your compensation, where you reap a lot of the upside is going to vary too. Like if you join a Series A startup, a lot of your upside could potentially be in the equity versus you may get higher liquidity at a company like Google or Facebook or something like that. So I think the short answer, if I'm understanding the question correctly, is like, yeah, I don't think it's disadvantageous from a candidate's perspective to say like, can you get me to where I am? But I think it's also important for them to realize that like the nature of joining a startup, if you're negotiating from a startup versus joining a larger company, it's quite different, and offer composition might look different. And I think a lot of the time good recruiters are trying to pull various levers to get to a compensation package that feels good, even if they can't necessarily meet the highest offer. But I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I do think it's good ammunition for a recruiter
You
to
should
go
always negotiate, right? I'll insert a quick plug. If you've been to any of our past webinars, a lot of them have been about salary negotiation. So I don't want to spend too much time on it in this one, but if you need help negotiating your salary, you should work with us. You don't pay us anything unless we get you a lot more money. It's completely risk-free, and Kevin, who's on our team, is amazing. And every situation is nuanced and different. Like it's very hard to give like one blanket answer for what should I do, because there's so many variables that go into it. So next question. How should you introduce yourself, connect on LinkedIn when trying to reach out to a recruiter at a company you want to work at? This is a good one. How do you stand out? What do you say? You only have like a moment to get their attention.
I mean, I don't think it hurts to just go up and introduce yourself, right? Constantly, I think, when we used to do in-person events, and as these slowly come back, I think, just introducing yourself to the recruiter and kind of expressing your interest, and then just, really quickly letting them know kind of what you're currently working on or where you're at, I think is typically like a good, first step, right? Again, I don't think you should shy away, or, if you don't have enough time to talk to them, maybe, get an email address, or, talk to some other person there. Because normally when we do events, it's not just going to be one recruiter. It'll typically be a team of people. Like we will bring not just like an engineer or an engineering manager, but also maybe one or two recruiters, so that we are able to try and meet as many people as possible. So again, recruiters are there to meet people. They're not there to, just stand there and look nice.
I'll give a really quick tip. I think there are actually parallels here to how recruiters do sourcing. And one thing I would say is like some recruiters get a lot of messages and a lot of pings, and you want to catch their attention as quickly and as easily as possible. So don't waste your time saying like, "Hi, my name is Zach from Los Angeles." Like it can be, they're going to see the first line of your message, and they're going to see your subject line, and you need to get their attention in order to get them to open it potentially, to be honest with you. So it might be a lot more effective to just say like, hey, I came across this blog post that you wrote that blah, blah, blah. And if they see that in the preview pane of their inbox versus like, hi, my name is George from, Minnesota or whatever, like you have a much higher likelihood that they're gonna open the email, and think that you have done your homework and are coming to them with something more than what 70% of people might do, which is send kind of a more templated thing that does not illustrate that they understand the value of the company, or really shows the case as to why they're specifically interested in you. So I think the one piece of advice that I would give really quickly is like, show that you understand their value and why it's uniquely interesting. Don't waste time, like take advantage of that very valuable real estate and catch their attention. Those are some of the first things that kind of immediately come to mind. But
It's kind of like echoing the so what rule from earlier,
yeah,
right? I'm George from Minnesota, so what?
yeah, that's right. Whereas if you can say like, I came across this blog post and like, it's actually super relevant to this side project that I've been working on, and I'm really curious, like, why did you do this thing in this way? Or that's much more compelling, if that makes sense. So
So go specific and relevant to the company. Don't write a long ass cover letter no one's going to read. This is kind of a good one. I think I know the answer, but what happens to recruiters during times of layoffs, downsizes, or hiring freezes?
We're the first to go.
Typically, yeah.
Yeah.
Bad truth often to be,
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, kind of like, having been through it myself, like, I would say a lot of times when recruiters do end up, getting impacted by these cuts, the nice thing is, they're not just the only person, so there is one, that psychological aspect of knowing that you have a support network, but also like the one thing that I've seen a lot is just how many people are willing to help potentially find, a home for them, right? And I think one is, they're usually able to connect and find, potential opportunities a few months down the line, few weeks down the line. At the same time, other recruiters also might take this opportunity to, potentially take some time off, right? Because recruiting isn't as like straightforward and easy as it might seem on the outside. There is a lot of kind of like work that you have to like put into it to be successful, right? So I think a lot of people will also take it as like a moment to say like, hey, now I actually can take some time to myself and not have to worry about, ghosting candidates or not following up with candidates and having them fall through the cracks. So those are like two things that I commonly see. And then also, if it is something where, they're like, hey, maybe I want to do a career change, they might take that opportunity to pick up a hobby or, find something like learn how to code or design or something. So, there are things that they can kind of do to keep themselves busy. Of course, everyone has their own kind of like situation that they're in, whether it's financially or kind of just like, their self kind of like goals and everything. So, there are things that recruiters will typically do to kind of like keep busy or at least try to get back in the market.
Well, yeah, it happens. It's cyclical, right? Every 8 years, a bunch of recruiters get laid off, and then hiring comes back, and then all of a sudden, like there aren't enough recruiters, and it just happens over and over again. And that's the nature of the business.
Even if you're one of the recruiters who gets retained, I mean, I think they are often, unfortunately, early in the line of fire because naturally their job is to hire, and what's happening is hiring is slowing down. But even if you are retained, I think it's never fun for a recruiter. It's often because you end up having to explain to candidates are going to ask like, why is this happening? What's going on? I think it makes life a little more challenging for some time, even if you end up hanging around. So these things do have a big impact on recruiters generally, I think.
Yeah, we recently did a little bit of analysis, and our guess is that about 50% of recruiting departments got hit in layoffs compared to, I don't know, like 12% of engineers. So it's bad for everybody, but recruiters are absolutely the canary in the coal mine. So we're at time. If you guys want to hang around for another 5 minutes, we'll take a few more questions. Afterwards, I saw some questions about the Discord. I'll hop in there for a little while. Maybe Kevin from our team will be there as well. And we will try to answer any lingering questions you guys have. Are you cool to hang out for another few minutes and get through a few more of these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Amazing. So Here's a good one. I'm going to try to avoid generic questions about salary negotiation because they are always so situational that, it's very hard to give good advice. But this one I think we can answer. So, do hiring managers actually care about how much total comp the candidate is offered? And hell, do like hiring managers even have visibility into that?
They absolutely do have visibility into it. So good organizations will always do headcount planning, like hopefully, 3 months before the next year starts. But of course, a lot of organizations cut that pretty closely. So they absolutely talk to them, one, about kind of what projects they see coming down the pipeline and what type of resources that they're going to need. So from that headcounting perspective, every, resource or, thing that they'll need, from whether it's, tools like contracting or actually hiring full time, there usually will be kind of a number there. And then they'll also kind of like try and budget around that in terms of working with finance, right? So again, like, don't assume that like companies have all the money in the world to kind of like throw out at you, even though they, let's say, have a hypothetical unicorn status of $1 billion, because with inflation as well as, things just running through that is actually pretty quick in terms of like run rate. So, I absolutely think hiring managers do have visibility into that. But I would say with larger orgs, not always will they have visibility into it, because it'll be trickled down from that exec in that role, right? So whether it's the chief technology officer or the VP, that's probably the most that it'll kind of get to. And then, I would say with the smaller orgs, if there are like senior directors or directors, then that's typically where, they might be involved. But a lot of times, if it is a larger org, then it's usually C and VP levels.
To humanize this a little bit, I heard a story from a friend of mine who was a hiring manager at a big company that at some point he started seeing the salaries for people on his team. And because he had been at the company for so long, their salaries were actually higher than his. So he had to go to HR and be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Guys.
Yeah, no, that was going to be my addition to the comment that got made. I feel like they do care, or they often should, in that they want to be fair to other people on the team who may have joined with a similar level of experience. And I think you just have to assume that people are going to talk about comp, even if it's not super publicly talked about. It's safer from an HR perspective, I think, to game plan it that way. Like, think that people are going to be talking about what their compensation is, and there are potential, legal implications too, to like massive comp discrepancies. So like, yeah.
Especially now, right? When states have started having to, companies in certain states have started having to.
And there might be that discrepancy as well, where if someone's been at the company for 5 years versus someone just coming in, because you have to remember too, that whole point of like different stages of the company. Like if you joined at Series A, you might have gotten a lower comp base salary, but you might have gotten a lot more equity, right? So the way to look at that is like long-term, your total comp in terms of equity plus base, to see if, you really are making less than this person who just came in, right? So that's also something to factor in when it comes to looking at your comp.
Chris, any closing thoughts about hiring managers and comp?
Two short ones. Totally agree with Jeff and Zach is my first point. It's actually probably the biggest internal parity is probably the biggest restraint recruiters have on negotiation. And two, I mean, this is why a lot of times hiring managers get removed from this data, is because they'll make hiring decisions based on their own compensation. And that adds a level of bias that also can narrow down, I think, your own your own ranges. So as many of you become hiring managers yourselves, please just take that into note and remember this conversation.
That's a wonderful closing thought. Okay, guys, we did it. I want to extend again a heartfelt thank you to all three of you, Zach, Jeff, and Chris, for being here today and for telling us the unvarnished truth. I don't think we would have heard some of these things anywhere else. And I learned a lot in this session too, even though I've been a recruiter myself. Hopefully we'll see you again soon, and have a wonderful evening. And interviewing.io folks, I will see you in our burgeoning Discord.
Thank you. It's fun. Appreciate you having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.